How would you feel about a law that requires people over the age of 70 to pass a specialized driving test in order to continue driving? Before we begin, do us a favor by clicking that like button, and subscribe to our channel for more top Reddit stories every day. That's a great idea. I'm going to call my 68-year-old congressman and ask him to support such legislation. Edit: most driving laws are passed by state legislators, who usually do drive themselves. And if they ever need to get a vote on such an issue, it's not like seniors are the best at getting themselves to the polls. Oh, you just made it all make sense. Younger voters are afraid to drive to the polls, lest they be hit by old farts in big cars careening down the road to cast their ballot. Maybe some are even being killed before reaching the polls, too, reducing the number of younger voters further. Here in Illinois, my grandpa had to do it every year after 75. I think older drivers definitely need to be retested and have restrictions put on their license as to driving at night, driving only within certain distances of the home, driving above certain speeds, etc., up to and including revocation if found to be impaired to significant degree. In Japan, they have special decals that identify new drivers and the elderly, which I think is a good thing. If you see someone with an elderly tag, you might not assume that driver sees everything you do or reacts as quickly as you do. I had trouble getting my dad to quit driving because I knew he couldn't see. He couldn't tell me from my daughter from across the room. I called the DMV for suggestions and they sent him a letter to come in for a vision test. He passed. He was in his 90s with cataracts and dementia. We had a lot of rancor over this issue and he ended up living with my brother, whom he would actually listen to. And he quit driving. My grandma is practically blind and went to take her driving vision test to renew her license. She failed, but the lady at the DMV felt bad, so she had her take it again and gave her hints so she could pass it. So now my practically blind grandma is out on the roads still. It's for their safety as much as anyone else's. I'm so mad that the lady at the DMV was so irresponsible as to let her keep driving. That's the kind of thing that should get you fired from the DMV, if not charged with a criminal offense. Bureaucratic discretion saves a lot of time and money when done well. I agree that she shouldn't have let her pass, but there are cases where the tester should use their experienced judgment over explicit rules. Edit: I did say she shouldn't have passed her. And to those saying fuck this is how it is. There's too many possibilities for everything to be codified and followed to the pen in big bureaucracies. On that note, I'm no expert either, just stuff I learned in high school. Old retired guy here, 74 years old to be precise. I would accept such a test provided it was only to catch really age-related diseases, dementia, poor reflexes, etc. I live in a retirement community and most of the people who should not have a license have already given them up. The first day I was here, I heard a conversation between two guys. Guy 1: I just turned 88 and turned in my driver's license. Guy 2: why would you do that? Guy 1: I don't want to spend the rest of my life in jail. I'd be okay with it if over 70 drivers are statistically more likely to get into accidents. I just looked it up for the US. I found a 2012 report. 16 to 19 has the highest number of accidents and then the rate decreases until 70. From 70 on, the rate of accidents start increasing again, but they never get back to the 16 to 19-year-old rate. I would believe those statistics. It actually never made sense to me to treat those under 18 as minors in regards to most laws and not allow them to enter contracts, etc., but then trust them with a 2-ton vehicle. Same goes for drinking age. If you can't trust someone to drink responsibly, I don't think you can trust them for responsible driving either. I know that in US driving is required in rural areas, etc., etc., but then the drinking and contract age limits are the ones that are wrong. Let me say this about that. The neighbor I love is 93 and still driving. When she's up to it, she can barely see the on/off switch on her vacuum cleaner. Should she be driving? I want her to maintain independence, but at the same time, I don't think it's safe for her or others. Yet the DMV doesn't require her to take a vision exam or a competency test, and that's why adoption of self-driving cars is so important. It would provide so much more independence for the elderly and disabled. Perhaps even more importantly, it would save us from drunks and idiots who insist on texting while they drive. I send patients for driver's evaluations if their ability to navigate through my office is concerningly questionable. Unaware drivers are just as dangerous as impaired drivers. I work with the olds for a living. The frequency that they casually drop my doctor told me I can't drive anymore, coupled with the fact that they drove to my office, is terrifying. One woman could barely walk, who also told me she couldn't see while I was demonstrating something to her, got in her car and drove away after her appointment. There's another man who constantly tells us he donated his car to someone who needed it but regrets it because he has to take the bus everywhere. The son told us they literally had to take it away because he kept driving on sidewalks and running lights, and he refused to stop driving after his license was suspended for drunk driving. I watched another woman just YOLO pull away from the curb as she was leaving, nearly causing a multi-car pile-up. One woman came in because she had head trauma from an accident she caused. She drove herself. Oh, I've also had my bumper smashed in by a patient just trying to park in the spot next to me. I get a full dose of their cognitive skills in my office. There are many times I'm pleasantly surprised at how sharp they still are. But more often than not I'm afraid for those who are sharing the road with them on their way home. While I agree they do deserve the dignity of having the same rights as everyone else, I do not believe that right should supersede the safety of literally anyone else on the road with them. All for it. When I was 14, my friend was coming to my house and he got killed by my next door neighbor who happened to be elderly. My friend was on his skateboard and he was just up the street from my house. From the position of his body and where elderly guy stopped his car, I could see he made a super sharp left turn that killed him and ran over my other friend. The other friend survived and recovered from his injuries, but my other friend not so lucky. Oh, and my granddad has Alzheimer's and frequently forgets where he is. And I think he still has his license, though my grandma finally took his keys. 70 seems a little young these days. I have a neighbor that I fish with at least once a week. He drives his truck towing a bass boat, without issue, and he's 71 or maybe 72. Of course maybe he's the exception, but I can see a test for people of a certain age. I'm just not sure what age I'd make the law. Maybe 75? My chick's 86-year-old grandmother drives, but she keeps it to daytime hours during clear weather and stays within about a 5-mile radius in our small town. Grocery store, pharmacy, post office, doctor appointments/vet visits, etc. She's not had an accident, but I could understand a driving test for her. Really though, her understanding her limitations keeps things safe for her and others. It's such an individual scenario, but I guess we'd have to draw a line somewhere. The idea for retesting just inconveniences your neighbor for the safety of others. He'll pass if he's cognitive and aware. I agree with most of this thread though. Everyone could use the retest at 10-year intervals. My father-in-law had some muscular degeneration for a few years before he passed away. He couldn't physically lift his feet to walk, and sitting wasn't much better. He ran a stop sign, and almost hit another car and a pedestrian with my wife in the car because he couldn't move his foot from the gas to the brake fast enough. She took his license out of his wallet and threw it in the fire when they got home. He was pissed for a long time, because in his head he was perfectly able to drive, and didn't even recall his near accident. Who knows how often that actually happened when we weren't around. I think everyone should be retested every 5 years, regardless of age. Road rules are changed, updated all the time, but only new drivers are ever tested on them. Once the technology improves, instead of normal driving tests, I'd be keen to put people into a VR driving test. So rather than driving around quiet streets and roads for an hour in the middle of the day, we get people driving through the city in peak hour and put them into likely stressful situations, e.g. having to turn right or left for LHD countries, across oncoming traffic, like where there hasn't been a gap for 2 minutes. A small gap comes up, but if the driver isn't paying attention and guns it to get through the gap, they'll hit pedestrians crossing the street they're turning into, which they would have seen if they looked. Yes, nearly every time I see someone driving under the speed limit, cruising in the left lane on the highway, or heavily braking for no reason and endangering people, it's an elderly person. Obviously there are elderly drivers who drive just fine, and younger drivers who are bad at driving, but at least in my experience, the majority of poor drivers always seem to be elderly. They might not even realize that they're going under the speed limit or braking constantly or whatever, and it really isn't good for them or other drivers around them. A very old couple ran a stoplight while my son and I were crossing the street under a protected light. They almost hit us and stopped just after the crosswalk. I approached them and asked why they ran a red light and that they could have seriously injured or killed me and or my 3-year-old. He said he couldn't see the light anymore. I told him maybe he shouldn't drive anymore and walked away. This was in a heavily crowded downtown area that was hosting a street fair. Not a few minutes later, my husband's cop friend found us and I asked him about this. He said it's especially bad in our area because most elderly people can have their driver's license for 10 years or more before it needs to be renewed. This is unacceptable. Health declines as you age and eyesight is a huge factor for most people, not just the elderly. At least doing simple eye tests yearly for those 70 plus could help reduce the amount of blind drivers on the road. But my state is mostly old people and that crap will never pass around here. Thank you for watching this fantastic story. Please tap one of the 4 videos on the screen for another amazing top Reddit stories.